Purple World. On the night train. So what's wrong with you? The question broke Daniel out of his daydreaming oasis. All right, it wasn't daydreaming as much as it was looking at the countryside view that the train provided, and every few moments, it looked like it could be placed on a postcard, if anyone still does that sort of thing. Daniel's eyes moved from the rushing, endless grassy hills to the big smile across from him. The vape balanced between his fingers and motioned rapidly for him to answer the question. What was the best Daniel could come up with? With a slight annoyance, the man took another inhale from his vape before continuing on. I said, what's wrong with you? What kind of question was this? Nobody said one word to him the whole train ride, which was okay with him. And now this. Why do you think there's something wrong with me? Daniel finally replied. The man chuckled. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You're on this train going out to nowhere, the middle of a desert, to be precise. And I mean this with no offense, but you are the most pitiful-looking man I've seen in a long time. How was that supposed not to be offensive? Daniel thought. If you put all that together, then it's obvious. You're going to Purple World, aren't you? That day, a soft tone rang over the communication system, signaling to passengers that the train was coming to a stop. Next stop, Mojave. The doors opened, and the passengers made their way to the terminal. Well, only the ones who had reached their destination, which in this case was only three, including Daniel. He looked at the two on either side. They never spoke to each other the entire trip, barely acknowledging each other's presence. They had no bags. It wasn't allowed for some reason. Daniel didn't know why and suspected the others didn't know either. Humid air in an otherwise empty station. Except the group of suits headed their way. When they finally reached the trio, only one spoke. His thick-brimmed glasses were so reflective that Daniel could see himself as he approached. Greetings, my name is Dr. Reinder, and these are my associates, he said while motioning to the rest of the group, who, upon being introduced, began to surround them. Not exactly in a threatening manner, but enough to make the point clear that they shouldn't have any illusions of running. No need to worry. As of this moment, you are in my care. Well, as a matter of speaking, please come with us. The middle of nowhere, that's how he described this place, which is not wholly untrue. There wasn't much of anything here except one thing. Purple World. Daniel had only heard it described, but even that didn't give a clear insight into what this was. He could see it for what felt like a mile. It wasn't the shortest drive from the terminal, but he had stopped paying attention to time and distance a while ago. The steeple glistened off the setting sun like crystal. When the shuttle arrived, and they were able to stretch their legs finally, Daniel gasped at the behemoth structure that, upon closer examination, could see where its name came from. It was not only purple in appearance, but was huge. How big is this place? One of the other two accompanying Daniel spoke. Oh, larger than it looks, I assure you, Dr. Reinder said. Follow me. Despite the friendly tone, it was more of a command than a suggestion. When Daniel took too long to move, he received a friendly nudge from behind from the guards. There was something off about the building. The closer they got, the more Daniel felt like he was being pulled into it. The doors opened, and that's all Daniel could remember from that day. The smell of honey was the first thing he noticed. It drew him from the bed. He didn't feel like he was walking but floating through the house. His house? There were flowers on the kitchen table and sunflowers that lived up to the name. The warm rays of the morning sunshine were streaming through the sliding doors to the patio. It had rained earlier. He could smell it. And she was there staring at the clouds. Please turn around, please. Wake up. Wake up. Light from the horizon woke Daniel from his sleep. Except there was no horizon. And when did he fall asleep exactly? There was movement up ahead, so Daniel figured he should head in that direction. A group of people all moved toward the same area, all wearing white. And that's when Daniel noticed that he, too, was dressed in white coveralls. A jumpsuit? When did he? A bell rung. But not here. It came from a distance. But the sound was getting closer. Daniel felt it before he heard it. The others eyed the tunnel in front of them. One looked in his direction before saying, "Brace yourself." Before Daniel could muster a response, he was thrown to the crease of the wall. Everything shook, and it was deafening when the bell rang this time. It felt as if there was an earthquake inside his body. His knees buckled so much he could no longer stand, on and on, until nothing. Everything went silent, and Daniel found himself unconscious. Once the trembling subsided, he could rise to his feet again. He heard voices and looked around for the group he had seen earlier. There were 12 of them, no 6. His vision was still blurry. One of them saw that he was coming and motioned him to come over. "They get easier to handle," one of them said. "What?" Daniel said in utter confusion. "I said they get easier to handle, the Quakes that is." He motioned to the surrounding area. The rest of the men nodded in agreement. 10 minutes later. "Right now, you're probably feeling pretty dizzy, but like Ian said, you should be okay. Give it time, and y'all shake it off like the rest of us, or not." "There really isn't any telling," one of the men said. "So that's going to happen again," said Daniel. "Oh yeah, at least twice a day," Ian said. "It's a way to keep track of the days here. Remember when people used to rely on roosters to crow in the morning? It helps if you think of it like that." "This is insane." "So what? That was in the morning." "Pretty much. It's like Murphy said, though. You get used to that here." "And where is here?" To that, Ian just smiled as he looked at the others who shared the same sentiment as him. "Come on, make camp with us. Somebody's watching." Elsewhere in a dimly lit room illuminated by the light coming off monitor screens, a technician anxiously tried to aim the cameras to keep track, but it was useless. He could hear the last few words from one of the monitors. "Come on, make camp with us." The black and white visual of the men leaving to make camp was soon out of view. His test consumed him so much that he didn't even realize he was no longer alone. Hit them back on screen. The technician's neck hairs bristled as he heard the shouted command from behind. Turning, he found himself facing Dr. Reinder, whose gaze was fixed on the monitors. He was looking for him and expected his orders to be obeyed immediately. "I can't, sir. I'm afraid they've gone out of range." This time, he looked at him. Although he wished he hadn't, he worried that his unmistakable fear might convince that he was lying. "What do you mean they are out of range? We should be able to monitor them further than this point," Reinder said with no small amount of annoyance in his voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but we do not have any surveillance in that area." His response was drenched in fear. "Tease, it's ridiculous. The cameras we put in near are no longer there, sir. It appears it's taken them down again, doctor," the technician interrupted, although now he regretted that decision. Dr. Reinder was notorious for being unpredictable, even when he was having a good day, and this was not a good day. He reached into his jacket pocket, which made the technician even more nervous, but those nerves subsided when the doctor retrieved a handkerchief to wipe down his glasses. "How long?" was all Dr. Reinder said. "Sir." The technician scrambled. "How long has surveillance been down in that area?" Dr. Reinder repeated. "Oh, I'm not sure." He returned to his workstation and began navigating through the archives, pinging the last signal, and it looks like the feed was terminated yesterday a little after noon. "We installed that one 3 days ago. It's never been this quick." Dr. Reinder said more to himself than the tech. Could it be a coincidence that the feed was cut shortly after Daniel arrived? "I'm not certain, sir," the technician answered. "Of course you don't. Order a team for replacements," the doctor yelled. Yes, sir, the technician said quickly. I knew you were special, Daniel. Dr. Reinder thought to himself with a smile. Campfire. The group of men huddled around a fire, which was not a fire, but a flower that glowed and created heat. All the men took great amusement at Daniel's confusion when Ian brought out the flower and proclaimed that he had found the flower power. Daniel could only guess that this was typical new guy fun at his expense, so he didn't want to ask too many questions right away. So this is Purple World? Daniel asked his new acquaintances. Yep, that's where you are, Ian said. Uh-huh. So why can't I remember entering this place? Or why am I here? You see, this same thing happened to all of us. We don't really remember how we got inside when we put on these clothes. I still think we were drugged. One of them said. We know you do, said Ian. So, Daniel, right? You'll notice that we know a bit more than you, but not by much. Still, the answers we have, we'll share. And as you just heard, we theorize the rest. Wait, so none of us knows why we're here? None of us know, if you know what I mean. But we do have our theories, Ian said with a smile. So? Daniel said with anticipation. Well, we came up with 3 ideas. Harry over there thinks we did something bad, and that this is some kind of prison. Has to be Harry, said. Ian extended a hand to another in the circle, and Cliff thought this was some kind of social experiment. Basically, we're just rats in a maze. And what about the third? Most of the men did a heavy sigh and then begged Ian to stop before going forward. Oh, that one is my favorite. It's the one I came up with. My theory is that all of this is the afterlife. What? If that were true, that would mean we were dead. Exactly. That statement hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Until now, you know what we have to put up with. And with that, the entire group erupted in laughter. Although Daniel felt a camaraderie in development at this moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that what if Ian was right? What if this was it, and that these men, this place, were the last dwellings for his soul, the replacements? Further ahead, a group of 4 shadowy figures moved along the interior of Purple World. The area was primarily dark aside from the luminous plant life. The flowers glowed with a mix of red and purple hues. The group had just entered a new area where the ground looked man-made, despite all knowing it was impossible. When the first of the quads stepped on the road, they instantly withdrew their foot. The ground where the first had touched produced a ripple of light. It resembled something you expected to see had someone stepped into a pond instead of a hard surface. The rippling expanded in all directions, illuminating the entire area and revealing the large cavern. The top of the walls appeared made of crystals with a violet color, while the ceiling was too high up to be seen. Grassy hills filled the surrounding landscape. Although the group could only assume it was grass, it did not have the typical green color like usual. Instead, it was pink and red in different places, all except the road that cut right down the middle, where it led to who knew. One stepped to the front of the group and beckoned the others to follow. Soon, the rest did as directed and proceeded as if everything that happened was just a typical day, because, perhaps strangely, it was, for them at least. The group noted Daniel and Ian's position to ensure the 2 groups would not meet. Communication with the desirables was prohibited. There were a few rules that could be bent here and there, but not that one, not unless you severely lacked a healthy sense of self-preservation. Had they encountered them, they may have had to come up with answers to the questions they undoubtedly had. One is, why did the 4 of them look the way they did? Each replacement team member wore a bulky white suit with a bubble-like helmet. The whole thing looked like something you would wear if going into outer space. The face was the only natural body part anyone could see, although it only had a blue tint. Standing a little in front of the team given the name Echo was its team's lead, Echo 1. She looked at the display each had attached to their wrist, wanting to ensure they kept a tight schedule. A blinking light displayed, indicating a message was coming through. Base to Echo 1 report. The request came into the headset, embedded in their helmets. Echo 1 here. We are moving into position for the first replacement surveillance unit. Over, Echo 1 replied. The rest of the team nodded to the one given the rank of 1 before returning to their task. Copy. The reply came. How come we're the ones out here for this? I thought it was Bravo's turn. Echo 2 said. A mild annoyance could be heard in his voice. Didn't you hear? There is no Bravo team anymore, Echo 3 said, while motioning with his finger across his throat. What? Echo 2 yelled. What? It was clear that he hadn't looked at the updated roster. Hearing the two in conversation, Echo 3 chimed in. That's what I heard. They disappeared almost 2 days ago. That's just a rumor. They have probably just been reassigned, Echo 4 said, while trying to bring more sensibility to the group. Oh sure, reassignment, Echo 3 said, while holding quotation marks. Well, maybe he's right 3. Bravo did like to cut a lot of corners. We all saw it, so maybe management finally did too, said Echo 2. Although he said this to reassure himself more than the others. I mean, they can't all be dead, right? It would explain why we are here and not them. Echo 3 said not to be as optimistic as 4, but not as fearful as Echo 2. He was somewhere in the middle, which he thought made him the most reasonable of the bunch. The speculation continued with the group, except for Echo 1. She had stood a little bit away from the rest of the team, not only because it was the job of the number one of each group to maintain contact with the command center, but had also made the decision to keep away from the non-essential conversion that the group was parting in. She had been with the company longer than the rest and understood that the company had precise rules to adhere to. As such, she never became friendly with the others and didn't want to give the impression that they were friends. No, this was a job and not in a safe place. People come in and sometimes don't leave. Making attachments could prove dangerous. It was because Echo 1 could see it that way, and when the promotions did occur, there were no surprises that she was selected. However, if the rest choose to live differently, that's their business. So long as it doesn't go too far, the risk would be minimal. However, while thinking this, Echo 1 heard something that caused her to believe that a line had been crossed. Echo 2, what did you just say? This was more of a command than a question and needed to be answered. What? I was only asking 3, did he know what was Bravo's last job? Echo 4 said, while showing a look of confusion. It was a look that the rest shared as well. No, that's not what you said, Echo 1 said. Echo 2 rolled his eyes, finally understanding why Echo 1 was so upset. He had been so careful, they all had been, and Echo 2 could feel the growing contempt that he was the one that let the secret slip. Okay, fine, Echo 2 said, with a bit more anger than he originally intended, but he decided it was best not to stop. I said, hey Randy, do you know what Bravo's last job was? Okay, is that what you wanted to hear? You used his real name. You broke the rule, said Echo 1, while pointing a finger in 2's face. For a few seconds it was quiet, the reprimand hanging in the air, waiting for another blow from the team's lead, until one of the others finally spoke out. Oh, come on, 1. You're the only one who takes the rules seriously, Echo 3 said while folding his arms. The rules are there for a reason. Echo 1 responded, a little more frustrated now that another was being defiant. If you can't follow them. Oh, come off of it. Truth be told, we all use our real names except you. 3 said. Echo 1 stood horrified. You can't be serious. Looking over the team, Echo 1 found that most of them were aligned together. She looked at 4, who was, for the most part, the most sensible of her subordinates. 4, sensing the pressure to step forward, did just that. It's true we've gotten better acquainted for the past couple of weeks now. We wanted to let you in, but you're such a stickler for whatever the doctor says. We knew you wouldn't be down with it, and we were right, said Echo 2. You're such a killjoy. Idiots were all Echo One could whisper. She wondered if it was enough to put in for reassignment, but would it look bad on as a team lead? Hey, what's that? Echo 4 stood fixated on something. By this point, they had arrived at the rendezvous point, but now there was some sort of smoke or something closer to a mist. Echo 1 had been going through these caverns for some time, but was still caught off guard now and then, and this place had its own weather patterns. They would have thought it was interesting if it already didn't cause just a bit of fear. Something about this mist was troubling, more than usual. Echo 1 activated the transmitter. Echo 1 to base, come in base. Nothing it was as feared. She turned to the rest of Team Echo, perplexed as the mist filled the space between them. Run. It was all she said, but when the word was uttered, the rest knew as well. This was how it happened. Whatever happened to the other teams, their disappearance, it had to be because of this. Echo 2 was the first to obey, then 3, then 4. Brace yourself, Danny. Ian pointed upward and Daniel heard it as well. The bell rang in the distance. Daniel knew what was coming. The others were like clockwork. Most of them crouched down and held on to whatever surface was grippable. Daniel did the same. The quake happened just moments later, and the ringing grew louder and louder until it matched the vibrations that shook the tunnel walls. He was ready, or so he thought. When it finally caught up with them, everything went black. And then Daniel woke up. When he did, he could hear the others talking. Ian was the first to acknowledge it. Well, look who's finally awake. That's when Daniel realized something that he had missed before. Wait, am I the only one that falls asleep when that happens? Well, yeah. Remember when we told you you'll get used to that? Well, when you do, you won't go Sleeping Beauty so easily. Oh, okay, so how long does that take? Afraid we can't say. It's different for everybody. It took Cliff here somewhere shy of 3 months to stay awake. A whole 3 months. Wait, how long was I out precisely? Daniel said, a little afraid of how long it would take him to build up such an immunity. Ian held up his wrist as if he were looking at a watch, except there was nothing on his wrist. Well, as you can see by my super sophisticated timing device, I'd guess 3 hours. 3 hours? Daniel yelled. Well, approximately anyway. There is not exactly a sundial here to go on, or a sun for that matter. Ian said with a playful smile. Hey, Danny, let's go to the falls. It's not far from here. The falls. Just trust me, Ian said while walking. Ian led Daniel through a series of tunnels. Along the way, Daniel wondered how it was that they never got lost through all of this. A few minutes later, they reached their destination, an open cavern that looked to be a mile wide, and in its center were the falls, which turns out were glowing waterfalls. It was the first water source he had seen since he awakened here, which now that he began to think about it made him a little on edge. Ian, what do we do for food in this place? With a bewildered look, Ian said. That's what you are thinking about. What do you mean? Yes, that's what I'm thinking about. Besides a glowing flower, this is the first sign of life in this place. I'm guessing that's what we're drinking, but where's the food, Ian? Daniel questioned in such a way that he wanted to make sure that he was not embarrassed at all to be asking these questions. This time, all Ian could do was laugh so hard that his knees buckled, and Daniel had to admit that he understood. This sight was beautiful, of course, and no doubt Ian expected Daniel to comment on it. Instead, he asked a much more practical question, one he still wanted answered. But again, he understood the humor of the situation. Okay, I understand you may be a little worried about where your next meal comes from. Follow me. Ian led Daniel down closer to the pool of water, a little bit away from the crashing waterfalls. There was a spot where Ian's group made camp beforehand. Ian withdrew a bag left there and withdrew a few cups. Handing Daniel one, he nodded to the water. It's fresh. After taking the cup, Ian pointed to the group of plants near the campsite. Yank on him. When he did, he could see that the plant had some sort of fruit attached. Without an invitation, Daniel took a bite. Was it sweet? Definitely not what Daniel was expecting. The two sat silently for a while, eating the fruit and water, mesmerized by the falls. The water seemed to fluctuate in color. Daniel was so lost by the moment that it only occurred to him that something was missing or someone. Where is everyone else? Ian kept quiet, pretending he didn't hear the question, but Daniel knew that was an act. Don't get quiet on me now. It's just you and me. I could have sworn we all were heading to the falls together, but then Ian never turned to speak. Instead, he kept his eyes on the waterfalls. Don't worry about them. They'll show up again. They always do. Daniel's confusion only grew, darting his gazes around the cavern looking for the missing party. What do you mean they'll show up? I thought you guys always stick together. Again, Ian never broke his gaze, fixating on one spot of the crashing water up ahead. It's hard to explain. Sometimes they're with me, and sometimes they're not. But Daniel started to say, however, Ian was quick to cut him off. Don't ask, please. While it was true that if one was looking outside of the location that Daniel was in, it resembled a large cathedral saturated in purple, what might have looked even more odd was that it had another structure sticking out from the side of it. This, unlike the rest of the structure, was pale white in color and had very little physical appeal to it. It was utilitarian for use and looked as much. It was awkwardly placed as if it was welded inside one of the cathedral's towers. If one looked closer, they might have seen that much of its components were added later. The piece that penetrated the cathedral itself was a massive construction vehicle. Its large windows were blacked out, and its metal frame had been reinforced to make it even more extensive than before. Tall cranes were also connected to the structure to the ground and provided access for those wanting another entrance, or in this case, a way to monitor the activity happening on the inside. The inside had been converted into the command center, where only a part was inside the Purple World Cathedral. Trailer homes were attached at the top to allow for more rooms to fit the occupants' needs. One of those rooms was a monitoring room, where a tech watched the screen before him, with Ian and Daniel displayed on the main viewer. To his left, he watched another story, or at least its ending. They had lost communication a little while ago, and there was no visual either. The only thing left was the tracking units that each member wore. There were 3 lights on the screen. There used to be 4. Each represented a life of Team Echo, a life they employed to go out into that creature. Not that anyone cares. Most of the workers here don't know each other's names. Except for the doctor, he was different. He was the only one who had the clearance to know, well, whatever it was that he knew. Everyone else was expendable, just like the 2 lives that were still out there. He could tell that they were running away from something he couldn't see. He hoped they escaped, but none of the others did, so why would they be any different? Come on, you can make it, he spoke to himself. Maybe if he cheered them on, somehow, just maybe, someone would survive. What was that? He almost jumped out of his seat as the doctor strolled in. The elevator doors closed behind him. He'd been coming around a lot lately. He must believe that his newest rat will give him the answers he wanted to see. I'm sorry, sir. I was commenting on Team Echo. It looks like we are going to lose them. He glanced over at the other monitor, saw the 2 blinking lights, stood there for a few seconds, and watched as the 2 lights became one. It couldn't be helped, however inconvenient. We'll have to replenish our ranks quicker than expected, sounding barely bothered by the situation. I suppose so, sir. The technician continued to watch the remains of Team Echo, wondering how long the last survivor would last. It's a pity, and I rather liked Echo 1. Dr. Reinder refocused his attention back onto the monitor displaying Daniel. Let's see what you are doing now, Daniel. Still with the other subject, sir. I can see that. Do we have audio in that location? Anxious, the technician ran through the programs, brought up the audio status, and focused on the two subjects. It looks like we have partial audio in that area. However, we also have a clear visual of their lip movements, so the program should be able to extract and generate a speech pattern to make up for what we can't actually hear. Surprising. I would be impressed if he did all that. After a few keystrokes, the main view screen expanded with a visual of the two subjects, but with faded audio. I don't get it. Are you saying this purple world is some sort of magic? But that makes no sense. The audio is cutting out, sir. I should be able to fix it in a moment and be done, the technician said, hoping to make good on his promise soon. His efforts proved fruitful as the scrambled audio returned. I'm not saying it's magic, but it's definitely otherworldly. You'll see strange things here, more than I already have. Dr. Reinder could see that Daniel seemed a little excited by that statement. He wondered just how long this facade would last. Oh yes, Daniel, who are you? Not long, Dr. Reinder thought. Ah, yes, finally, we are getting to it. Dr. Reinder smiled, seemingly getting the answers right in front of him. What do you mean? I told you all that I know. No, you haven't. Maybe you think you have, but there's something else. It has to be something to do with me. Ian, what are you talking about? I've never met you before today. That was yesterday? Sorry, I didn't mean to yell, but you've been here more than a day now. You haven't disappeared yet, which means you're real. Real? Dr. Reinder raised an eyebrow, although he wasn't too sure why. Although he knew about Ian's instability, something was here, and he could almost see it. Subject 2 seems to be getting scared. He's backing away from Subject 1. The technician interrupts the doctor's train of thought. Well, of course he is, wouldn't you be? But the question now is, will they go further? They have to know how they are connected. Clenching his fist, Reinder looks anxiously at the monitor, fearing his two subjects will move out of surveillance once again. Ian, I think you should calm down. Maybe you've been here too long. Calm? I've been very calm, patient even. I waited until now to ask you these basic questions. I've shown you around and introduced you to my friends, Cliff, Harry, Murphy, and the other guys. I haven't named them yet. That's right. I keep forgetting to do that. It doesn't matter. You've had the dreams, haven't you? You know about that? Yes. Now tell me who you are. Wait, where are you going? Daniel? You're not thinking of leaving me, are you? Daniel, Subject 1 is out of visual range, sir. Yes, I have eyes. A frustrated Reinder said, down under. What was that? The same thought ran through his mind as Daniel ran from Ian. Looking back, he recalled what caused him to run in the first place. At first, it was the group Ian traveled with. They had disappeared without explanation, and then there were the dreams about the woman, which Ian somehow knew about. It was all of this, but the most important was just the look in Ian's eyes. Something was just not right. It was as if the version he'd been interacting with was a fake, and that the glimpse of what he just saw was the real Ian. He had only gotten away because he had never considered where he was going. The caves twisted and turned, and he took any random direction he could find. Several tunnels were spread throughout, and while he initially considered it one big cave, different tunnels led to various things. While trying to escape Ian, he took a tunnel that glowed emerald green. When running into it, he could see that there was much more plant life in that area. The walls were covered in vines, and the illuminance flowers from before were also present. The further he traveled, the less it felt like a cave and more like a forest. Rounding a corner, he tripped and fell into a pool of water. Pulling himself upright, he gasped for air. When he sat up, he saw that the water came up around his knees, or they would have had he been standing. The area also housed several trees. A wetland in the middle of all of this couldn't rank as the strangest thing around, because he knew there must be more to come. But when he looked closely, he could see one odd detail he had missed when he arrived. The trees were a dark blue, which seemed to complement the surroundings. He braced himself against the nearest one to lift himself up onto his feet. That's when he could feel the tree shift under the pressure of his hand. Despite its look, it reminded Daniel of a foam mattress. His hand made a mark even after Daniel pulled it away. He stayed there mesmerized by the imprint he made on the tree. He was so engrossed that he hardly noticed that he found that if he wanted to keep it in view, he would have to look up because, apparently, the forest was rising. Or more accurately, was that Daniel was sinking. Shaking off the trance, Daniel realized that the knee-high water was now closer to waist height. A cold shiver ran through his spine as Daniel grasped what was happening to him. He threw his legs up and down to escape the strange swamp. But it was no use. His giant steps splashed the water only for him to have gained a few feet. Panic began to set in until he found a small ray of hope not too far from where he was. He spotted a small island nearby and directed all his efforts to reach it. He hadn't seen it before because a small level of mist had set in and blocked his view of the tiny island until Daniel got closer. However, every step seemed to work against him. He would get closer to land in one sense, only to lose it while sinking to the bottom. He thought perhaps he could swim his way there, although when he used his arms to paddle through the water, he felt even though they made no contact with the ground underneath, he still felt his arms sinking or just being pulled to the bottom by some unseen force. The water now rose to his neck, and it took everything he had to keep his head above it. This only lasted for a few seconds as water made its way into his mouth. He hadn't prepared for it and choked the water back up. His heart pounded in his chest as he accepted the very real possibility that he would die soon. Drowning, was that how he would escape this place? Something in him didn't want this to be the end, so with everything, he crouched under the water, taking a giant inhale of breath as he did. His legs exploded with power as he made a large leap through the water, performing his best breaststroke. He had no idea if he was any good of a swimmer in the life he had before, but right now, he hoped so. Within seconds, his hand reached the edge of the island. At first, he couldn't get a hold of it because everything crumbled into the water as quickly as Daniel grabbed it. After the third attempt, he felt something under the water that he could grab hold of. It felt like a vine. Honestly, Daniel couldn't care less what it was. All he knew was that it didn't break. He gripped tight of it and pulled. Something sharp pierced his skin and Daniel wheezed in pain, but Daniel refused to let go. His hands followed the vine until it reached the top of the landmass and Daniel started to pull his way upward. He managed to pull his body halfway out of the water and decided he could breathe just a little easier. He had just started to pull himself out of the swamp when something caught his eye, causing him to freeze. Someone stood just a few yards away. The fog still covered the area, so Daniel couldn't get a clear view, but he could tell she was a woman with dark hair. The only other detail that stood out was that she wasn't dressed in the same white jumpsuit that he and everyone else he met wore. She didn't seem to notice him because her back was turned. Daniel thought it was strange that she hadn't seen him yet, as he was sure he had made enough noise earlier to keep from drowning. Even stranger was the feeling of déjà vu, as if he had seen this sight before something had caught his attention from the corner of his eye. It was flowers, but not the ones that glowed earlier. No, these were from his dream, which meant the woman. Something in him urged him to shout so she would turn around. But stronger than that urge was another feeling, fear. As she turned to walk away, Daniel felt helpless. The moment she was out of view, he felt something grab hold of his legs. It wrapped around tightly and began pulling him down into the swamp. Daniel couldn't see what it was, but it felt like the vines he had clung to stay above water had just started to pull himself out of the swamp when something caught his eye, causing him to freeze. Someone stood just a few yards away from him. Fog still covered the area, so Daniel couldn't get a clear view, but he could tell that whoever it was, she was a woman with dark hair. The only other detail that stood out was that she wasn't dressed in the same white jumpsuit that he and everyone else he met wore. She didn't seem to notice him because her back was turned. Daniel thought it was strange that she hadn't seen him yet, as he was sure he had made enough noise earlier to keep from drowning. What was even stranger was the feeling of déjà vu, as if he had seen this sight before something had caught his attention from the corner of his eye. It was flowers, but not the ones that glowed earlier. No, these were from his dream, which meant the woman. Something in him urged him to shout so she would turn around, but stronger than that urge was another feeling: fear. As she started to walk away, Daniel felt helpless. The moment she was out of view, he felt something grab hold of his legs. It wrapped around tightly and began to pull him down into the swamp. Daniel couldn't see what it was, but it felt like the vines he had clung to stay above water. He was in no mood to appreciate the irony of the situation. Whatever force was tugging at him was strong, yet before he could get halfway out of the swamp, he had already exhausted a considerable amount of strength. The vines had pulled him back in so far that the water filled his mouth again, causing him to choke on the eerie liquid. His energy began to wane, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he would be taken. Realizing this, he decided not to delay the inevitable and let go of the vine. His descent was quick. One moment, Daniel had a lung full of air, and the next, he was several feet underwater. Looking down, he could see that the strange vines still held him and pulled him downward. The light of the surface grew dimmer, and Daniel wondered just how long he had before his breath of air finally gave out, which, perhaps by chance or unconsciously, will happen in the next moment. He lost concentration and let out his last bit of air. For what seemed like an eternity, there were no thoughts. He expected to die soon, so when that wasn't the case, he opened his eyes to find that he was perfectly fine. He was still being dragged underwater, but he wasn't suffering or in any amount of pain. He found that he could breathe just fine. Why was he not dead? He thought. But what was even more strange was his almost lack of fear. He was more fearful of getting the mysterious woman to notice him than whatever this was. At first, the water was dark, and if the vines weren't still dragging him down, Daniel wouldn't know up from down right now. But soon, something caught his eye, a small light coming toward him. The radiant green held both an allure and fear. As it reached him, Daniel saw that it looked like a sort of jellyfish. Not long after, several others appeared and surrounded Daniel. The one in front started to shift, and soon its shape began to change. It also seemed to grow, as it was now twice Daniel's size. When it completed its changes, Daniel saw that it was now the shape of a human head. That alone would have been enough to cause Daniel to be anxious. But what made him even more so was who the head was. It was Ian's. Ian's glowing green head hovered over him. At first, it looked more like a still image. Then the eyes started to move and look down at Daniel. Its mouth then curled into a smile. It sent shivers down Daniel's spine, and he desperately wanted to escape. Just then, the rest of the green entities also started to change their shape. Instead of giant floating heads, they became large spheres. They were still green in color, but also glass-like, and they began to produce images inside them. All of them were different. As Daniel floated down, he tried to take a glance to see what they were. Inside one was the woman he saw earlier, still with her back toward him. Another showed Ian in a similar jumpsuit instead. This one was orange, and between his hands Daniel could see a pair of handcuffs. More images filled the spheres, and Daniel almost found them familiar. But when he did, a feeling of dread took over. "No!" Daniel screamed, and the spheres floated away. After their disappearance, light illuminated from underneath as the ground opened up, bringing a vortex under the swamp waters. Viciously spinning him around as the vines pulled him into the void, Daniel found himself spewing out of the water. His body was flung over onto dry land. The impact wasn't too bad, but still, it took a while for Daniel to recover. Once he did, He once again found himself within cavern walls. He spotted some flowers ahead and decided that it was just what he needed to dry off. A couple of hours had gone by and Daniel felt good enough to move. Where to he wasn't sure. He ran almost aimlessly through this strange world, all to get away from Ian. It worked out. He was free from Ian and anybody else he had met since waking up in Purple World. It had just dawned on him that he was alone for the first time in this place. He considered it might have been preferable to be in the company of a lunatic than to have no company at all. For one moment, one insane moment, he thought about going back. Not just to cure his loneliness, he wanted some answers if he were honest. How did Ian know of his dreams? And wow, did he know who the woman was? What if he knew him? But it made absolutely no sense. A sound interrupted Daniel's thoughts. It sounded like footsteps. Someone is coming? Was it Ian? Perplexed, Daniel wasn't sure what he was going to do. Obviously, he wanted answers, but not on Ian's terms. Maybe he could see them conversing when he calmed down, but it was time to hide right now. Daniel spotted a cluster of large rocks nearby, or more accurately, a monumental-sized quartz. The large crystal-like mineral was more than enough to hide himself. Behind this rock would be sufficient. Daniel ducked down just in time before Ian entered the cavern. He could hear him breathing heavily. He must have been chasing him all this time, Daniel thought. Just keep going, he pleaded to himself. But when he heard Ian shift around, he feared he might have left some clue that he was nearby and stopped to find him. A fight was not really what he wanted, but if he was left with no choice then. "Where am I?" Ian said, except it didn't sound like Ian. In fact, Daniel was almost sure that the voice didn't belong to Ian, and it sounded robotic. "Base, this is Echo 1 repeat. This is Echo 1 come in." Daniel heard. "Who is this?" Daniel peeked out from the rock he was hiding from, but what he saw was not what he had expected. Standing only a few feet from him was, as best as he could describe it, an astronaut. Whoever they were wearing a white bulky suit, seemingly the same color as what he was wearing, but this had the added computer components along the body, complete with a helmet that reminded Daniel of a fishbowl. Perhaps it was against his better judgment, but Daniel was too curious and decided to step out. "Hello?" Daniel said, trying to conceal his nerves. The astronaut jumped back. He was oblivious that Daniel was even there, let alone looking for him. "Who are you?" Daniel started to ask, but before Daniel could finish, Subject 2. The mysterious stranger replied, "Subject 2." Daniel only grew more confused. For a brief moment, Daniel thought maybe this was one of the members of Ian's group who had disappeared and returned in disguise. It made little sense, and he realized it was ridiculous thinking about it more. Not only was this not one of the men he had met earlier, but from what he could tell, it may not have been a man in that suit. It was hard to tell as the voice was slightly robotic sounding. "What did you just call me?" Daniel demanded, but the astronaut didn't respond, only grunted in frustration as they looked at a device attached to their arm. "No, this is unacceptable. What's my position?" "Grid 4, Section 2? The strange figure said while gesturing over the display screen, not looking in Daniel's direction. Daniel took the chance to step closer but slowly. This was noticed by the strange astronaut, to which they immediately looked at Daniel. Daniel froze as if he had been caught doing something wrong or dangerous. That's when Daniel could see the figure a little better. A small light inside the helmet illuminated a young woman's face. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Daniel thought he would get a proper greeting this time. However, her words were short and stern. "Stay away" was the only greeting he would get from the stranger. Before Daniel could respond, she turned and started back in the direction she had come from. Quickly, Daniel ran to catch up to her, not wanting to let go of the only lead he had to the mountain of questions he had. "Listen, you seem to know something. Maybe you know more about where we are." You could answer some quick questions before you leave. Nothing. She didn't even stop walking, much less indicate that she wanted to answer any of Daniel's questions. Would you just wait a minute? Daniel ran ahead to block her path. No. Now, please move away from me before. She stopped mid-sentence, eyeing something behind Daniel. When he turned, he saw that his blocked path had disappeared. In its place were a set of large wooden red doors. The two had found themselves at a dead end. What? This isn't supposed to be here, she said. What is all this? With no reply, she started on her way back, only to find that the path away from there was blocked as well. A wall of shiny violet crystals filled the cavern tunnel. Daniel would have guessed these had been here for years if they hadn't come from this direction moments before. What? That wasn't there before, Daniel said. No, this isn't right. I didn't break any of the rules. Before Echo could utter another word, the doors started to open. The pair looked to the path in front and behind only to see that all the crystals began to grow brighter, matching the light from the opening doors. Perhaps they were linked. They opened simultaneously, and the light that poured from them was blinding. Echo's helmet gave her some protection, but Daniel was not so lucky. He was brought to a kneel. The light reached through his eyelids, his arms offering no relief. All this before the sound of the gong. It was only getting louder between the deafening ringing and the blinding light until nothing. He opened his eyes, but couldn't see much more than a white hue. The grass crunched beneath his feet. Wait, when was there grass? Still dizzy, Daniel reached for the wall to balance himself, only to grab a hold of nothing but empty air. Not far from him, he could hear someone grumbling. Hey, you space lady, are you over there? Why did you call me that? Echo asked. Well, I figured it just fits. Plus, it's not like I know your name. That would have been the opportunity to tell me, you know? Otherwise, it's going to be Space Lady for the foreseeable future. Seemingly ignoring his comment, Echo looked around to get a sense of their surroundings. Well, that's not good. It looks like we were taken to another part of the site, Echo said. What was she talking about? Daniel was only now seeing blurry images, but couldn't see even 3 feet before him, so how could she? Wait, are you telling me you can see? I can. My equipment isn't just for aesthetics. It helps me navigate situations like this one. We call it spontaneous transference. But Echo could tell that technical definitions were the last thing Daniel could think about. He was still crouched to the ground, holding his hand out to find something to hold on to. He wouldn't find it though. She thought about helping him to his feet, but declined the thought as she had more pressing things to consider. Plus, she knew his loss of sight was only temporary. Well, that's lucky. For you, Daniel said sarcastically. Don't worry. You should regain your vision momentarily, Echo said, while inputting on her arm display. A series of beeps and pinging sounds could be heard as she did this. Daniel, a strange yet familiar voice said. Daniel's name was spoken again, and he was sure it was not his new friend. Who's there? Hey, Space Lady, you heard that, right? I'm not just imagining things. But she kept quiet. Did she leave? Hello, where are you? Daniel, I'm going to be late, the voice said. It was strange, but it sounded happy, almost playful. Daniel got the sense that he not only had heard this voice before, but had also had this conversation before. The more Daniel thought about this, the more he felt uneasy by the whole thing. Who is that? Are you here? Tell me, please. There was no response. However, the space lady was correct. His vision started to return. Sort of a consolation prize, he thought. Little by little, his blurry eyesight began to see shapes until he could see that the space lady was again correct. They were not, in fact, in the same location, but rather in an open field. But where was the cave? He could feel a fresh breeze hit his face, and when he looked up, he could see the sky. This made no sense to Daniel. Not that anything made much sense in this place, but still, how could they have moved and not been aware of it? Did it have something to do with the strange lights? He heard movement at his side and glanced just in time to see the space lady remove her helmet. Her light brown hair dropped past her shoulders as she took a breath of air. Wow, so you're so young. That was not what Daniel was thinking, but he hated for things to get awkward on top of everything else that was going on. Am I? Hadn't noticed, she said while withdrawing a device resembling a cell phone and waving around the air. Besides knowing we're still in the compound, I can't confirm more than that. Not even with my equipment. Well, how do you know we're still inside? Daniel gestured to the full moon looming in the sky. Because this, to me, looks like the outside. I know it looks that way, but trust me, we are still inside this thing. She stayed focused on her handheld, all business, and never turned to look at Daniel. Not even when she spoke to him again. Echo, that's what you can call me. Well, that's an interesting choice. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, the name or the fact that she chose now to reveal it to him. Okay, so Echo. Your parents must have really wanted you to have a unique experience at school, Daniel said with a bit of a chuckle. It's obviously not my real name, but it's the one I was given when I agreed to work with the doctor, Echo said, still focusing on the handheld. You mean Dr. Reinder? Wait, did he just remember that? With a raised eyebrow, Echo nodded. Yes, that's right. So you retained some memories, or did you just remember that one detail? This time, she gave Daniel a bit more attention, as he just piqued her curiosity. I'm not sure. Some things are starting to come back now, but not everything. Please, if you know something about me, and I know you do, please just tell me. For a while, there was nothing. Whatever she was not supposed to tell him must be important, perhaps even dangerous. But the fact that she was waiting gave Daniel some hope that she would tell him the truth. That was what he was hoping for, at least. He had no leverage to play here. While he waited for her to answer, once again, the voice said his name, Daniel, with no indication of where it was coming from. He had hoped that now that his eyesight had returned, he would have better luck seeing who was out there playing games with his mind. There it is again. Please tell me you heard it that time. Daniel pleaded with Echo. He hoped that if she could hear the mystery voice too, he might convince himself he wasn't going insane. Echo took one look at him and could see how desperate Daniel was for someone to believe him. And as she was the only one there, she felt that burden fell on her. She wouldn't lie to him. That's just not who she was. Fortunately, she wouldn't have to. The woman's voice? Yes, but only just now. This helmet protects me from the anomalies in this place. Most of the time. So what is it? Who am I hearing? Daniel asked. I can't say for sure, but if I had to guess, I would say it's your wife. It was the only time that Echo chose to look at him, but when she did, Daniel saw something on her face that he hadn't expected to see, a look of sadness. I have a wife, yes, I remember now, but why does that make me feel empty? It was as if a puzzle was being put together, piece by piece. The woman's voice and dreams had to mean something, something important. Daniel only nodded his head to show Echo that he was ready, ready for all of it. She moved over to a clearing of large stones. She sat down and motioned for Daniel to sit on the one opposite hers. So, where do you think you are? She asked while waving a hand in the air, indicating their surroundings. Why was she starting there? Of course, he was curious about where he was, but he would instead begin with the fact that he was married and only now remembered. Even more strange that the stranger Echo knew that fact, but he didn't. But as Daniel thought about it, he realized that she must have known all this as well, and he would have to trust that she was leading him in the right direction. I'm with you, and we are in some kind of open field somewhere. Daniel knew he only stated the obvious, but what else could he say? There was something more, a few words, or perhaps it was a name. Either way, it made no sense, so he opted not to say. Echo frowned. Did she know that he was holding back? No, we are in the same place you were since you woke up. She looked right into his eyes. All of a sudden, he felt a little intimidated by her. The same place, she repeated while pointing a finger to the ground. There was a slight hesitation, but only for a moment, Purple World. He said it, thinking he sounded foolish for doing so, but it had been the name that stood at the top of his tongue. Yes, do you remember what Purple World is? Daniel shook his head. He didn't. How could he? He didn't even remember he had a wife. That's not surprising. Don't feel too bad about it. The others before you forgot as well. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but thought it wasn't the time for questions just yet. He suspected that he would have plenty. Echo took a deep breath before continuing. 5 years ago, it came from the sky, when we assumed it was only a standard meteor, and that it was supposed to miss Earth, instead of changing course like it was guided here. It definitely raised some eyebrows, but the experts were so sure that it would burn up in the atmosphere. It did not. Instead, it came here to Mojave, a huge piece of metallic rock the size of a small town. It had a purplish look to it, so somebody with all the intelligence dubbed it Purple Rock. Hey, that got both of them to smile. Anyway, the material it was made of was of interest to certain government officials, and I'm sure it caught the eye of even more savvy people than that. But the exterior was hard to crack. It was only because the meteor had openings in it that they could go inside. Despite the apparent safety concerns, the government sent teams inside. Most made it out fine, all but one. I wasn't there at the time, so I'd heard all this secondhand. But according to records, the missing personnel was an army chaplain. It was an old tradition of a priest first on an expedition. The idea was that if extraterrestrial life forms were encountered, a man of peace should be the first to greet them. In any case, he went off on his own for a little bit. However, he was still in radio contact. He said he found a door of some kind, a set of red doors. This time, Daniel couldn't help but say something. Wait, are those red doors the same ones we ran into? Nodding her head, she went on with the story. He was told to stay put until the rest of his unit reached him. He obeyed, but before the others could arrive, he said the doors had started to open and that there was this light. That was the last anyone saw or heard from him. When his unit did arrive, they didn't find the chaplain or the red doors he reportedly saw. But what did happen was the meteor started to change. It was like an earthquake, but it was only inside the meteor. Within minutes, the hunk of space rock looked man-made, like a cathedral. We couldn't ignore the coincidence of the priests disappearing and suddenly, Purple Rock becoming something else. It was another few days before another expedition was approved to find the chaplain. But the inside changed as well, and it kept changing. So much so that we could only map the interior with a fraction of accuracy. Every day was a new maze to get lost. But that wasn't the most frightening part. The real issue was the disappearance kept happening. More than a few of us wanted off the project, but they had potent ways of motivating compliance. At first, it appeared random which of us would be taken and which would be left behind. It became sort of a sick game we would play. It was the only lottery that nobody wanted to win. But then somebody started to see a pattern. When one of us was taken, they would simply replace the lost one. Out of the original crew, only one remained. Echo touched her chest, indicating she was referring to herself. I was left behind, and Dr. Reinder put together a theory about what was happening. He asked me many questions and found that I may have some habits that offered some protection against the celestial. People who spend time together talk to each other, become friendly, and even form close relationships. That was the case for everyone that had been taken. There was a little of a pause as Echo could see the question that Daniel had, what he wanted to say, but perhaps not wanting to sound insensitive, he didn't. So she decided she would answer regardless. You're wondering what made me unique and why the Celestial never abducted me. Daniel nodded in silence. He was curious, but also didn't want to upset the flow of the story. He thought perhaps he would get answers along the way, even if they weren't immediate. I have something called reactive attachment disorder, a fancy way for doctors to say I don't like to hold hands. I don't get people, so I never really connected with them. I never share anything personal. I don't meet up and have a drink with them. I don't do any of that. Some say that's weird, and I suppose that's true. However, according to Reinder, somehow, the Celestial could sense people's relations with each other. Whenever people got too familiar with each other, they were taken by the Celestial. It became a rule for us to not know too much about each other, not even each other's names. A bit excessive, but those were the rules put in place to prevent further abductions. But where there are rules, there would be those who break them. I came here with a whole team behind me. Without me noticing, they grew too close to each other. They knew I would disapprove, so they kept it hidden from me. I wouldn't have let them anywhere near the Celestial if I had known. Now I'm all that's left. Daniel sat there and tried to absorb all that he heard. As unbelievable as the story was, Daniel believed all of it. However, that didn't matter. None of it mattered because he couldn't see what that had to do with him. So Echo Daniel finally responds, "Let's say I believe all of that. What does that have to do with me? Why am I here?" "You're here to feed the Celestial," Echo said bluntly.
What? I'm not going to be fed to anything, Daniel shouted. He was already confused, but now he could add shock to the mix.
That was the wrong way to put it. But just like all that came and went before, you might be the next the Celestial to choose. Until now, Daniel had been calm about this situation, given the circumstances. Echo found it easier this way, but now she could see that part was over. Most likely, it was due to how she explained things. Echo wanted Daniel to return to a calmer state. However, she wouldn't sugarcoat the truth either. "This makes no sense," Daniel yelled, exasperated. "Why me? I'm nothing. The others you talked about were all important people, like soldiers and scientists. I'm just a..." He trailed off, not knowing how to finish the sentence. Who was he, really? I can't even remember. Why can't I remember my life before this? The Celestial takes your memories and then offers them back to you. We still don't completely understand all this. To be fair, there have been different scenarios, but that doesn't mean there isn't a pattern. You see, after the army chaplain was taken and the Celestial took a new form, there was a case of this happening again. It was a divorced couple. No one knew at the time because they kept that hidden from us. By this point, we had already established protocol against too much familiarity. They wouldn't have received approval to work together if we knew about their prior relationship. They did everything to avoid being in the same room together. They didn't talk. They were placed in separate units for the excursions. She went first and almost immediately lost her memory. When the ex-husband heard about it, he went to the Celestial to look after her. But as you may have guessed, he also lost his memory shortly after the breach. When we tried to evacuate them, the Celestial changed. The tunnels changed the rooms, and we had no way out. Only after we were ordered to leave them behind did the Celestial allow the rest of us to go. It was like we were getting in its way, and it didn't seem to like that very much. We monitored them, and when they finally found each other, neither one remembered the other. It was like that for days. That's when we did our research and discovered their prior relationship and what ended it. They had a child who was killed 2 years prior. Their marriage didn't last too much longer after that. It was pure coincidence that the two were recruited for the assignment. But somehow the Celestial knew. We lost visuals and never saw them again. Dr. Reinder has been obsessed with recreating that exact scenario. Echo stopped talking. Was she done telling the story? Daniel frowned, disappointed that he still hadn't had his questions answered despite how fantastical everything he had heard was. "So that's it. My wife is here, and the doctor set all this up so he can use me in some experiments? Well, fine. Where is she? I've been seeing and hearing her for days or hours. So why haven't I? I told you, the celestial takes your memories and then offers them back to you, but you have to accept them. Echo repeated those same words. Perhaps she was trying to imply something, but all it did was make Daniel angry. You say that like I don't want them, and you're wrong. Unlike you, I don't know who I am, and if somebody can tell me, then I would want to know. Echo's eyes widened at Daniel, except they weren't at Daniel. When he turned, he found that the doors had returned. It towered ominously in front of him. If you want to know, was all she said. At that moment, his words were like ice in his lungs. Did he really want to? His hand inched toward the handle. He struggled against the weight as he pulled the door open. For just a moment, he hesitated but couldn't stop. Just as before, a large beam of light erupted until he was inside, all without taking a single step. When the light subsided, he could see that he was no longer at the field with Echo anymore. Instead, he was inside a house. No, his house, he remembers that now. In his kitchen, the flowers in the blue vase sitting along the table. They were her favorite. He gave those to her. He could see her soaking in the sun just outside the patio doors. Jennifer, Jennifer, he yelled. His body moved toward the door, but his hand passed through the handle. He screamed her name again and again, but she never turned around. What can I do? She won't even acknowledge me, Daniel thought. Jen? The voice came from behind him, his voice. When he looked, he saw himself entering the room, button-up shirt half tucked in, chewing on half a piece of toast. Jen? Daniel, I'm outside. Come look at this. She stood on her toes, arms stretched to the sky. Can't, running late as is, Mark called in, so I have to cover for him tonight. So, rain check on dinner tonight? Daniel said, swallowing the last bit of toast. Do I have a choice? She replied. A little look of sadness could be seen on Daniel's face. Do me a favor? And don't wait until it could be all night. Don't worry about it. They needed another nurse for the graveyard shift anyway. Originally, I said no, but might as well. Looking at the past, Daniel thought he could see her smile, but couldn't be sure. Hey, it's the American dream, Daniel said as he headed to the door. It was all Daniel could do, but watch the surreal moment as he watched himself walk past himself. That's when it finally started to sink in. This was it. He could remember this moment, but couldn't remember Jennifer's face because he never saw it. He would never see it again. Don't leave, he cried to his past self. You won't get this chance again. He wouldn't listen, so Daniel thought that a little force was called for. He jumped in front of his past ego to block his exit, ready to smack him to the head. But it went through him when he did strike, just like the door handle. In fact, his entire past self passed right along through him, out the door. The day became night before the door opened again. He already knew he was on the other side of this the first time around. He hoped he was wrong, but when he saw his former self again pass through those doors, he knew what had happened. Jennifer, you home yet? He called out. Usually he would have called, but that day he couldn't. He looked over to the kitchen table and saw his cell phone. He'd forgotten it that day, but only realized it too late. Oh, there it is. 10 missed calls. Daniel started to sweat. What did he miss? First contact Jennifer's work, 4 missed calls. Police department, 2 missed calls. What? The phone rang again, the vibration almost causing a drop. 3 times. Hello? Yes, this is the what do you mean incident. The memories that were just out of reach before rose to the surface. The call from the police, him going to the hospital where she worked, but had to be there to identify the body. It all came back. Someone had done this. A monster. He was told that it was a mentally ill patient who became paranoid that he was being experimented on by the staff. When they tried to calm him down, he took one of them captive, Jennifer. Nobody stopped him. Why did no one stop him? He had questions. Everyone had questions. Why wasn't he there when the murderer was sentenced? Why did he never return anyone's calls? And why, after 3 months, did he step into traffic? And what made him stop? You understand now, don't you? Echo's voice was so soft that Daniel didn't realize he had returned from one reality to his previous one. A fog had set in, and the green meadows, now covered in mist, made it impossible to see far in the distance. Slowly, Daniel nodded. Yeah, I understand. I know why you, doctor, wanted me here. You said it's the connection, right? Something emotional? Right, so you remember? About Ian? Echo said softly. Sure, he's the monster that killed my wife, Daniel said coldly. Echo nodded and went on to fill the gaps Daniel might have had. Yes, he was declared insane, and somehow the doctor arranged for him to be brought here. He had always intended to lure you here, but after your suicide attempt, it made it that much easier to arrange for your transfer as well. Echo paused in case Daniel wanted to interject, but he said nothing. She wasn't sure if it was the right time to ask, but she had to know. Now that you know, what will you do? Before now, he could never imagine wanting to hurt someone this much. But the more he thought, the more he felt it made complete sense. Sure, maybe he thought about it once or twice in between the funeral and trial, but he was so numb to the whole thing that he couldn't even get angry. But now it was different. It was what he was brought here to do, right? With his eyes closed, he could see the two faces, the one belonging to his wife, Jennifer, and the other to Ian. Just a short time ago, he was beginning to see Ian as a friend, which somehow worsened it. Daniel felt his heart nearly beat out of his chest until it became calm. He knew what he had to do. He opened his eyes and could see Echo was still patiently waiting for his answer, so he thought he would give it to her. That's a stupid question. I'm going to kill him. It had been too long without any sign from Daniel or Subject 2, as they had been calling him. Usually, if they lost touch with a subject this long, it meant they were already gone. Usually, Dr. Reinder still had reason to hope that the crossover event had not happened yet. Subject 1 Ian was still being monitored, which means if he hadn't crossed over yet, then that could tell Daniel was still here, roaming the Celestial. Doctor, we've made contact with the subject, one of Dr. Reinder's subordinates said. Hey, good news, the doctor thought. Oh, Dr. Reinder said. Yes, well of a sort. The smile on the technician faded, as he wasn't sure he had the good news the doctor wanted after all. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Dr. Reinder rose to meet the foolish tech that dared to raise his spirits to only deflate them. Now be careful what you say next. Your future depends on it. The tech stood upright before continuing. Well, what I mean is we've located Echo 1, sir. She apparently survived, but according to her suit's parameter centers state that she's not alone. It does appear that she has made contact with Subject 2, sir. Reinder smiled at his excellent fortune. He usually would hate that his experiment had been tampered with, but with hopes of witnessing a crossover event, he could let a little interference slide. Besides, he knows Echo 1 must have had little choice in the matter, and since interference had already transpired, what could it hurt to take it a step further? Moving to the technician's workstation, he looked over the sensor logs on the monitor. So we're reasonably sure we can locate Subject 2 then? Yes, so long as he stays near Echo 1, we should be able to maintain a location, the technician said, trying to hide his nerves. And we still have a location for Subject 1. Yes, he's a few kilometers away. It appears he's looking for Subject 2 as well. Good, the doctor said, pressing a button on the control desk and positioning himself over a microphone that was stationed on the desk. This is Dr. Reinder. Have a team ready in 10 minutes. Wait for my instructions before entering the Celestial. Affirmative, the reply came. You're sending a team? Now? The technician asked. No, I'm accompanying them. If I've learned anything from this, It's that I can't leave anything to chance. Back to the meadows. I'm going to kill him. After Daniel said the words, he turned to Echo. After everything she told him and what he just experienced for himself, thanks to the strange whims of the Celestial, he wanted to see what her reaction would be to him now. Would she try to stop him? However, he couldn't read her well enough to know either way. She didn't look like she would counter him in any way. At least, that was his guess. You have nothing to say about that, said Daniel. Her suit emitted a noise. She looked at a flashing light on her arm. No, I suppose that fits. Considering all he put you through, it only tracks that you would have that mindset. Oh, and you wouldn't, Daniel yelled. Echo could see the clenched fist combined with Daniel's startling glare. She looked him over and realized that he had changed. Was it only a matter of time? Was the doctor right all along? She wasn't sure what the outcome of this would be, but she hoped that it would be somehow different from what was predicted. It doesn't matter what I would or wouldn't do. It's not my test. I'm not the one being examined. I told you why. She looked elsewhere as if waiting for something. Because you don't feel like everyone else, that's what you said, right? It was confusing, and the whole situation made little sense, but for the moment, it was Echo that made the least amount. You said you didn't share anything personal with your team. That's why you were left behind this whole time. But since we got here, you shared plenty. Not entirely personal, but seeing where we are. And you know the dangers more than anyone that has stepped foot in here. Why would you risk it? Because she is tired. A powerful voice echoed through the mist, the moonlight catching the gleam of Dr. Reinder's glasses. Although much of him was still obscured by the mist itself, Daniel could still see the smile. Behind the doctor's glee were others dressed as Echo was. The lights from their suits pierced the fog more than their actual bodies. There was no telling how many there were, but that didn't matter much to Daniel. It was who they brought with them. He could barely make out the silhouette of the tall frame, but he knew. The doctor clasped his hands together. Oh, my dear boy, I can't express how happy I am to see you. You have no idea what this means to me. I have an idea. Is that why you brought Ian? So you wouldn't miss the Celestial before it does whatever it does. Dr. Reinder's smile widened, and his eyes darted over to Echo. Ah, so you two have been getting better acquainted. How adorable, but it does save me time. My dear boy, I assume she told you everything, or was close to it anyway. In any case, you have the fortune to contribute to science. He motioned to his men and two came forward, with Ian being held in between. The fog still obscured his face, but Daniel could imagine that he too must be smiling. He's evil, Daniel thought. Everyone here is evil. You and Subject 1 here, well for this process anyway. Is this a joke to you? Are we just rats in a maze to you? Daniel said angrily. Yes, you are. Dr. Reinder said he was very blunt about the situation. But you shouldn't take that as an insult, Daniel. Most go through life not contributing much of anything to the betterment of mankind and what they can truly accomplish. But now your life can truly have meaning. Flashes of his life began to drift through his mind. The first time they met, their first date, the day of his wedding. The more he remembered, the angrier he became. Are you saying that before, while I still had a life, when I had Jennifer, my life was meaningless? What about love? A fairy tale made for children. I deal with reality, and the truth is that knowledge is the only thing worth acquiring. But please indulge your anger. Look at the man who took your beloved wife from you. Doesn't it make you ache that he's still here, but she's not? The rise and fall of Daniel's chest made his eyes water. His body shook uncontrollably. He hated everything about this moment. but at the same time, he couldn't escape it. Before he realized what he was doing, he was already halfway to Ian, still held tight by the two soldiers. Daniel, don't. You don't have to do this. Echo's words were so distant from him that Daniel had forgotten she had been with him the whole time. Then give me one good reason why I shouldn't, Daniel shouted, and a tear rolled down his face, although he couldn't understand why. Because it's what he wants. If you kill him, then you might be lost, just like the others. You won't come back. Yeah, and what makes you think I want to be here in the first place? You know enough about me to know that I have already tried to end it. And as far as giving the doctor what he wants, he can rot, but at the same time, I don't care about him. Or you. I only care about making things right for my wife. You mean for yourself? She snapped back. And why not? He yelled. Why shouldn't I do what's best for me? Leave him be Echo, in fact. At the snap of his fingers, the rest of the armored men surrounded them. The pattern of flashing lights was the only thing that shined through the mist. Two of them came to both sides and grabbed Echo. She struggled for a moment, but gave up quickly as she could see that she was drastically overpowered. Honestly, you're not helping the situation progress any further, so it's best if you were to be quiet. Is that a threat, Doctor? Does that mean that I am no longer of interest to you like these two men? Even if you do witness an event, what will gain you? My dear Echo, you were of interest to me. You were the control, one that never got emotionally attached because it's something that you could never do. Even when you were with Daniel, you tried to forge a connection, right? And how did that work out? Now, as for what I gained, knowledge and power, I hate to repeat myself. Dr. Reinder moved toward Daniel while removing something from his jacket pocket, grabbing Daniel's hand and placing something cold into his hands. Now you must remember that I am on your side. It's true. I'm giving you what you want. You will never achieve this result in the real world, but here it's different. Take your vengeance. Reinder stepped to the side and made a gesture to Ian. Daniel looked down and gripped tighter around the handle of the blade Dr. Reinder gave him. He looked over to Ian and saw a smile. What do you have to smile about, you monster? Aren't you going to beg me not to kill you? Ian's lack of fear unnerved him. How was it that the one being held captive waiting to die wasn't afraid or could even smile? But Ian's face changed from a smile to bewilderment when he asked his question. Danny, why would I do such a thing? We're friends, aren't we? With that, the eerie smile returned. I knew we were connected. That's why I had the doc bring me to you. A raised eyebrow from Dr. Reinder and a few mild touches of laughter from Dr. Reinder's men only heightened Daniel's tension. Ian's grin only grew larger, but his eyes never broke contact with Daniel's. See, I have a confession to make. We're all going to die. Only part of Ian's frame could be seen as the mist intensified. There were a few under-the-breath laughs and some chuckles, but a few were smarter than that. And what do you mean by that? Dr. Reinder interjected. Am I to believe that you have some sort of scheme somewhere in that maze of a mind? A scheme? What are those? All I'm saying is I know something that you don't. Did you know that I have a friend? Not just Daniel, but a much bigger friend. Daniel's mind went to the others he met before. Where had they gone? He never got a good answer from Ian. You mean the others? I guess there were rats like the rest of us. Where did they go? Others? Reinder looked nervously between his two subjects. Only then did it dawn on everyone there that Ian was right. There was something that he didn't know. What are you talking about? There aren't any others. Everyone in the Celestial is here right now. There are no other subjects. That's not true. There are several others here. I've met them when I first arrived. He started to continue, but noticed the oblivious stares from not only Reinder, but Echo as well. Look, I'm not crazy. I'm not like him. People here like us were wearing these stupid white jumpsuits and everything. The mist continued to grow, but even still, he could tell that everything he was saying was foreign to them. Ian shook his head and began to whisper, "It's no use, Daniel. They're not like us. They're not chosen. They can't see." At that moment, one of the soldiers shrieked and vanished into the mist. Without hesitation, the armed men fired their weapons in the direction their companion was last seen. But they saw nothing, and they heard nothing. They frantically began looking for who or whatever was among them. Daniel crawled to the ground, hoping that would offer some measure of protection. Echo joined him. Apparently, the suit men who held her captive had more pressing things to worry about. An unearthly quiet followed once more by a shriek, then gone. Daniel could see the suit man's feet yanked upwards, followed by a scream, and then nothing a shrill cry then. Silence. Gasping for breath, Daniel still managed to whisper to Echo, "Do you hear anything?" Rising to a crouch, Echo surveyed their surroundings. The mist had begun to dissipate, so perhaps it would be possible to make out who their foe was. What she found, however, made her smirk. "No, I don't hear anything, but I do see something." Just a few feet away, who also clung to the ground, was Dr. Reinder, who lay shriveling with a contorted face. When he met her gaze and could see her smile, he frowned. "You okay, doctor? You look a little tired." He mumbled a few choice words before returning to his feet. He dusted off his suit and fixed his tie before withdrawing a pistol from his jacket. "What good is that going to do you? It didn't seem to help any of your underlings." "You're still here? Or did you forget you are subordinate to me?" Dr. Reinder held up the pistol as he adjusted his glasses. Gaps in the mist gave him only a glimpse of their surroundings. "I think this will do well enough for him." 2 shots sprang from the gun's barrel. They found themselves in the white jumpsuit standing before them. Without Subject 1, this should all be over. "You killed him?" Echo protested as she and Daniel both raised back to their feet. "But the experiment? It is useless if I'm not alive to observe the actual event." He sighed, and his view is now on Daniel. For several long moments, he was quiet. Such a waste. If only you had not hesitated, Daniel. I suppose I don't have any use for you anymore. His hand raised, his gun drawn once again. He expected some level of fear, but not this level of shock. Daniel's gaze wasn't even focused on him, but "Ralph," Daniel whispered. Before Dr. Reinder could comprehend, a pressure gripped around his throat. A gasp of air left his body. He was unable to turn to get a good look at his assailant fully, but he knew by the size that this wasn't Ian. "Raph, it's you?" Daniel repeated. "Who" was all the doctor could manage to say. The force from the hand holding him in an iron grip grew stronger as he felt himself lifted off the ground. The clearing of the mist revealed half a dozen men, all wearing identical white jumpsuits as Ian and Daniel. However, only one of them contains 2 bullet holes in his chest, with no other sign of injury. "Ralph is my friend, just like Harry and Cliff, and I'm sorry I forget the rest." Ian stepped into the half circle of his cohorts. He was waving his hand over them in front of Dr. Reinder. Reinder, still clutching his one free-hand pistol, Ian eyed it as it tried to find its way pointed in his direction, only to be halted by another of Ian's allies. With almost perfect ease, the men turned the gun away from Ian before prying it away from Reinder. His eyes darted at each face with more confusion than fear. "I suppose you're probably wondering who they are. How did they get in here without your exclusive invite? I could cure your curiosity, but I won't." Reinder's eyes fluttered open and closed until they were too heavy to remain open. After that, the rest of his body went limp. Ralph released his hold, and Dr. Reinder's body folded to the ground. Daniel swallowed hard, and his hands shook even harder. "How? Who are these people?" Echo exclaimed. The others huddled around Ian as if to await another command. He had his eyes locked on Daniel. Only after they made contact did he even notice Echo had said anything. He looked perplexed as he strolled toward them, stepping over Reinder's body. She took a step back, and now regretted drawing more attention to herself. He raised a hand and pointed in her direction. You're still here? That's something. Hey Danny, why is she still here? I thought she would have been handled like the rest. He scratched his head as he looked around. Oh, I know. You know what I think, Danny? Ian said with a smile while slapping himself in the face. You insane lunatic. What are you going on about? Do you think that this is some sort of game? You just killed all those people. Daniel screamed. However, the smile never left Ian's face. He threw his hands into the air. What? No, I mean kind of, but not really. It was my friend, or it was our friend if you think about it. He stood close, eyeing the knife still clutched in Daniel's hand. Is that for me? He said, pointing at the knife. You didn't seem to want to use it before, so I wasn't sure. I thought maybe you had stage fright. Ian began to circle Daniel while the other men huddled in a pack. You don't care if I kill you? Daniel said while making sure his back was never facing Ian. Well, I think we're all dead already, remember, just like I said. But I would let you do it anyway because, why not? Subject Ian, Echo started to say, but corrected herself. I realize you only care about Daniel, but what about the rest of you? Echo approached the others, who chose not to move at all. I may not have had the highest clearance, but I thought I was made aware of all subjects of the doctor's experiments. To her disappointment, the group did not react or give her any indication that they had heard a word she said, let alone that they would answer her questions. Why won't you respond to me? When she was ignored again, her body slumped, her eyes shut as she took a deep breath and released. With his back facing her, Ian nodded toward Echo. Well, look at that. They won't even give her the time of day. Should we put her out of misery, Daniel? I'm starting to feel sorry for her. The impact came across Ian's face so fast that he had no time to react. The world spun around him until the grassy meadows met his plummeting body. His tongue tasted the fresh blood that gathered on his lips. When he glanced upward, he saw Daniel's clenched fist, his knuckles stained with Ian's blood. His eyes were a mix of intensity and tears. All you can think about is killing when you're the one who should be put out of his misery. A sharp kick was sent into Ian's abdomen. Was that why you killed her? No reply. Daniel struck again. This time, it was a blow to Ian's face, then changing to his stomach again and again. My Jennifer, how could you? Daniel continued to deliver blow after blow to Ian's body, a mix of kicks and stomps to his head and torso. Daniel could feel a slight crack from Ian's side after one of his kicks. The air was quiet, and a long pause sat between the two men. Ian rose to his feet. Blood stained his face and white clothing. His smile faded, replaced with a sobering stare. When Ian finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. His voice had lost any sort of glee. I didn't mean to. Kai killed her, I mean. The people at the hospitals never cared for me, always making excuses to get out of the same room as me. But not Nurse Jen, your Jen. She was always kind to me. She would make sure that I had enough to eat, and that I was getting plenty of rest. Such a mom, right? She was there to make sure I took my medication even though I didn't like it. But I always took it. Well, most of the time, until the day they said I had to leave. Had to go back outside. But it was so cold I knew I wouldn't survive. Nurse Jen thought so too. But then I had a plan. I would act like I was going to hurt someone. Not really hurt them, just pretend. Then they couldn't let me go free. They might even let me stay. I thought Jen could help me pretend. I told her about it. I think I did, I'm sure of it. They came to take me, but I grabbed her instead. I grabbed the knife that came with my meal. I held her by her neck. I said, get back, or she dies. Ha, she acted so scared. So scared, I thought maybe so wasn't. I didn't mean to hold her too tight. You have to believe me, I never. She just stopped moving. Then she was on the ground. She never got back up, and it's my fault, isn't it? Daniel could see the scene unfold during his confession, like the vision he had before he could see the events unfold. But from Ian's point of view, just as Ian said, Jennifer had talked about the coldness of those who worked with her, and how there was so little compassion for people like this Ian. He could see her sneaking in a little extra dessert with the patient's meals. She was such a light in the dimness. He could see her fear when she knew it was her time, when the one she was trying to save. Back when Dr. Reinder held you captive, you were going to let me kill you because that's what you want, isn't it? Because you feel guilty, don't you? Ian remained still, his gaze aimed at the ground. It was then that Daniel remembered that he still had the knife. Just before he struck Ian, he had turned the knife so that it was facing downward. He brought it up to his face, which got Ian's attention. The entire time I was slugging you, it never occurred to me to use this on you. It would have been easy. You weren't even defending yourself. Then why didn't you? Ian said curiously. Because I finally remembered her, how she lived, how she loved. I didn't have to be there when she died to know that, even at the end, I could see it on her face. She loved you, Ian. I'm not saying I do, but maybe I should. What I do know is that she wouldn't want your life to end this way, so maybe don't let someone take it so easily. Ian's eyes widened entirely and filled with tears. Daniel said what he needed to and started to walk away. You to Danny, Ian said. Daniel paused and nodded in agreement before continuing over to Echo. Is that how you're going to end things? Echo said, nodding to Ian. What else can be said? He then turned his attention to the group of others. Isn't that right? Was that what you needed? One of them spoke. Echo whipped around at Daniel's quick response. What? Now you talk? She said snidely. Daniel eyed the man he had come to know as Ralph. However, this time, he looked at him, really, at all of them. You too, he said while picking a pair out of the group. You were on the train with me, weren't you? Harry, was it? If that is the name you wish to use for me, I would take no offense. Harry was the one he spoke, but all of them seemed to nod in agreement. It then occurred to Daniel that they seemed to all look in the same direction and make the same movements. So, you read not like us, I am what you are in. You've called me several names, the Celestial for some. However, at the camp you call me Purple World. You mean you're not human? None of you? Echo's eyes widened at the Daniel's claim. Human. No, I am not as you are. I am other. You're the Celestial? This entity we're all in? Echo exclaimed. But she again received no response. Why won't you ever answer her? Daniel asked curiously. We can't see her clearly, so she was not chosen. However, we can see through your eyes, the Celestial said. What? But I was? Why? Was it because that Reinder guy brought me here? Daniel exclaimed. No, it was not his will that brought you here, but ours. It was proposed to bring you here. Another one of them spoke. Did they think in a hive mind? Daniel thought. Propose? Daniel couldn't understand what the Celestial was trying to claim. What does that mean? I should weigh in here. One of the others came forward. Daniel recognized him as one of the faces from his first night at camp, and even before that, as one of the two men on the train. He had never spoken before, something Daniel never noticed until now. He was just someone who clung to the background as he came forward. His white clothing, identical to what Ian and Daniel wore, changed to a dark green military uniform with a white collar along his neck. My name is Arthur, he said. I've been here a while, although I'm not exactly sure for how long. Time in this place is sort of relative here. Arthur? Daniel repeated the name in his head to see if it meant anything to him. But the only thing he could come up with was that if he was part of the Celestial, he shouldn't have a name. Not unless. Arthur Schwartz, Echo interrupted. The missing chaplain? Daniel's eyes widened, recalling the story from Echo earlier. Arthur nodded. Yes, that's true. I was the first taken. Because of that, this Celestial bonded with me. A lot of its actions are, in part, due to our connection. It formed the way it did after looking into my mind and reimagined itself into what I would find most comforting. Daniel remembered how Purple World looked on the outside. It resembled a large cathedral, and Echo concluded as much when telling the story of its origins. So, a big church? Daniel said with a raised eyebrow. I imagine you can't find that too surprising, Arthur said with a half smile. But that doesn't answer your question, does it? You see, you and Ian are not the only ones who had a connection to Jennifer. While I did report to the military, I also served in the same hospital where Jennifer worked. She was a wonderful soul, and I do not doubt you made her proud today. What? Daniel interrupted. The explanation left Daniel feeling a little speechless. The whole thing seemed far-fetched, with too many coincidences. Say I believe that how? This will take a lot of work to explain. Arthur stretched out his hand to Daniel. Please take my hand. It will make explaining things easier. Daniel just looked at the strange man in military clothing. Perhaps he was telling the truth, or maybe this was another ploy by the Celestial. He couldn't be sure either way. He had more than enough to justify declining the request. However, before he could settle on any one of them, he found his hand already raised, meeting Arthur's. The two made contact, and Daniel could feel the energy flow from Arthur into him. A warm sensation was felt inside, flowing up his arm until the strange energy enveloped the rest of his body. A moment later, Daniel heard the familiar sound of the bell. Within a moment, the two of them were no longer in the meadows. Instead, they were in the sky, or something that resembled as much. Everywhere Daniel looked were endless blue walls and floors. He wasn't even sure that he was even standing on a floor, only that it looked like the mist from before covered the ground that they stood on. It gave Daniel the feeling that he could fall off endlessly at any time into nothing. Arthur could see Daniel getting a little anxious about their new surroundings. Placing his other hand over Daniel's, he gave a slight squeeze and a smile to comfort him. You see, this way you can see my thoughts, like you did earlier when you went through the red doors. Daniel nodded, not understanding completely, but enough to signal he was ready for what came next. So where was I? So with me being bonded with this being, one can feel all the connections one has with the outside world, provided that there is an emotional attachment with that individual. I can feel the consciousness of everyone I know. That's how I learned about Jennifer, and through her you. I felt her passing, and I could feel the pain it caused to those she cared about, especially you. Her death felt like a natural disaster. I could see you staring into the busy street, contemplating ending everything. I could feel every step you made to try and end your life. That's when I reached out and stopped you from committing a terrible mistake. As Arthur spoke those last few words, Daniel remembered something. He recalls standing in front of the busy street doing just as Arthur said and wanting to end everything. He'd stood on that same street for weeks before finally descending. Enough was enough. When he saw the city bus approaching, he stepped out at the last moment, hoping not to give the driver enough time to stop. It looked like he was going to get his wish as upon seeing him, the driver blew his horn and attempted to stop, but he was too close. Daniel closed his eyes and waited for the pain to be over with when he swore he heard someone screaming. Multiple people did this when they saw the upcoming collision, but what caught Daniel's attention was that someone had spoken his name. Hearing his name caused Daniel to stand back and avoid the fatal hit instantly. And now Arthur was telling him that he was the voice that had called out to him. So why does this celestial do what you say? The question grew more and more as Daniel listened to what Arthur had to say. What was this connection? Surely, this alien entity didn't care about Daniel. Is it your slave or something? Slave? Arthur frowned. No, it's nothing like that. Yes, it's true. It gave me the ability to reach out to you, but it has its own will. It's more of a partnership, although a pretty unique one to say the least. I know all of this might be hard to believe, but come on, Arthur said. while stretching out his arms and indicating their surroundings. Look where we are. Ironically, as soon as Arthur had said those words, the two were back at the meadows. Echo, Ian, and the rest all appeared to be in the same positions as when they left, which led Daniel to believe that the two of them may not have actually gone anywhere. He was no longer in physical contact with Arthur, so perhaps the whole thing happened in their minds. Okay, so now what? Did I pass some test or? Daniel asked, feeling drained about everything that happened that day. Well, if you're ready, we would like you to come with us, Arthur said, nodding back to the group of people known as the Celestial. The Celestial? It was hard even to pin down what they were. He had so many questions to ask, but at this moment, he could only utter a few. Where would we be going? This time, one of the celestial bodies spoke. You would not perceive it correctly with words, but where we go, you will find peace. Daniel looked over to Arthur to see if he had a better explanation than that, but all he got was a playful smile and a raised shoulder motion. Daniel could tell that was the best answer he would get, yet it didn't bother him. He felt a sense of completion. Perhaps he had done and said all that he needed to, and yet he wanted to do a little more. What about Ian? Is he coming with us? Daniel asked, and while he waited for the answer, he was surprised as he didn't know how to feel about whatever the response they were about to give him. He is not ready. When he is, he will have the same choice as you. Daniel looked over to Ian, who had collapsed onto his knees, taking only partial glances over to Daniel. His eyes then settled over to Echo. He could only imagine what was going through her head. Though they just met, he hated to leave her here like this. Hey Echo, thank you for sharing. Don't let me be the last one you do that with. He smiled, and she did the same. And if it's not too much trouble, and I know he will be, take care of Ian. Until he gets where he's supposed to. Her eyes glazed open, no longer looking directly at Daniel, but beyond him. When he turned, he was faced with a red door again. It started to creak open, spilling out beams of light as it did. Arthur stepped in first and disappeared into the light. The Celestials stood in front. Their bodies changed shape, becoming larger in size and visually opaque. The beams of light become warm and inviting. As he stepped forward, Echo called out to him. Flora, Echo called out. Confusion filled Daniel's face as he turned back to face her. What? It's my name, my real one, she responded. Daniel grinned as he looked up to the Celestial. Do you see her now? They took a moment before responding. Yes, we do. With that, Daniel walked into the room through the door, laughing as he went before he vanished away from the meadows.